So the Bullard benefit, we talked about that. And 20 to 30% of the tickets go to the community. And so many of these events in Atlanta that you and I have been to, you know, they're black tie events. They're stuffy. Yep. And it's the wealthiest of the wealthy of Atlanta or Chicago or whatever city you're in. And, you know, we may be having a fundraiser, but the people who are benefiting aren't actually there. Mm-hmm. And so, look, man, I grew up in South DeKalb. I felt like that was a disconnect. The folks who I grew up with, they would be comfortable there too. They would want to have a good time there as well. And so we give away 20 to 30% of the tickets. And we have long tables, not round tables, and we eat family style. And at the very first Bullard benefit, Congressman Lewis, in what may have been his last big public appearance, and as you and I talked about off air, you wouldn't, in one part of your house, allow the kitchen to be burning down as you knowingly sit in your living room while part of your house is burning down. You wouldn't do that.
No.
And so we have the opportunity to put out fires in other communities throughout the city of Atlanta, but also throughout Georgia, and at some point also throughout this country.
Yeah, I think that's dope because, you know, it's one thing to highlight just certain things that you see.
Yes.
You know, people talk about it. Some people don't talk about it, and they act as if it goes away.
Yes.
But I think the beautiful thing, what I've seen you be able to do, bring people together from different backgrounds, have a seat at the table.
Yes.
And typically, it's some people, I think of some of the guests who I met just from you.
Yeah.
And I never thought I would have met them.
Yes.
Even going all the way to Dan Cathy.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So to be able to have these conversations, I know personally it has benefited me just from a personal side, from learning, being able to implement some of the things that I've seen. Very rarely we have Atlanta natives come into the lounge and share their stories. I'm a down South Georgia boy, but not born and raised in the city of Atlanta. But we got you, though. So you played the game, played it at a high level, but it wasn't by accident. Your father played the game as well.
He did, man.
Played with the Denver Broncos.
He did.
So talk about that influence and the impact that it had on your life at such a young age that propelled you to what you're doing now.
Yeah, man. My father just recently passed last year. And my father went to Morehouse College, and he was president of the student body and captain of the football team. And he told me this story when I was young that when he was in high school, he went to high school in Houston at Booker T. Washington High School, and they won the state championship. And my father was All-State for like 3 or 4 years at offensive tackle. And he wanted to play football in college, but my grandmother said no, that he wasn't going to play football. He was going for academics because she thought that academics was the only way. And so he goes to Morehouse College, gets accepted to Morehouse on an academic scholarship. And back then, you would get on a train, and you would then take the train from Houston to Atlanta. And so he got off the train in Atlanta, and the football coach at Morehouse was receiving his recruits. And he sees my father. Now, my father played offensive line. In the 60s, he was 6'5", 330 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
And so
Stud.
he was stud. And the coach was like, I didn't recruit you. Do you play football? He said, no, sir. He said, where are you from? He said, I'm from Houston. And he said, what high school? Booker T. Washington. The coach calls back to Booker T. Washington and says, do you know a kid by the name of James Bullard? And he says, yeah, that was one of the best football players we ever had. So the coach goes over, gives my father pads, and my father played football for 2 years without my grandmother knowing about it.
Wow.
And so he was All-American at Morehouse and then went off to play for the Denver Broncos. And I tell that story because, you know, it's important because academics and athletics both matter. Mm-hmm. And it's important that we think that they both matter. And there's an equal weight to both of them. And one of the stories is I had a first grade teacher, Mrs. Adams, and I had a difficult time reading and writing. And my mother, who was my hero, decided she wasn't going to put me in a developmentally slower class, but she was going to change schools. And so I went to a new school, and this lady by the name of Mrs. Adams, I was taller than her in first grade, man. And but she decided that after school was over, even though I wasn't doing well in school, when school was over, she was going to take me and tutor me, and she taught me to read phonetically. and 3 grade levels ahead of my peers. And I wouldn't have gone to the Air Force Academy or Georgia or Harvard Business School or Duke Law or any of those places if it were not for her.
No,
So, you know what I truly think about is I think that there have been a lot of people who've done good things for me and put me in a position to help other people. I think about the shoulders that I stand on. I think about my grandmother and other people's mothers and grandmothers who helped me be in a position, and that it is my reasonable service to pass it forward, to pay it forward,